The hegemony of advanced civilizations had a problem, and like most problems involving the HFY, it stemmed from their unfortunate habit of believing their own propaganda. For 3 millennia, they had governed the galaxy with the sort of benevolent condescension typically reserved for particularly slow children, secure in their conviction that their technological superiority and moral enlightenment made them the natural shepherds of lesser species. It was a comfortable delusion, really, and one that had served them well until a certain blue-green marble in an unremarkable spiral arm decided to join the galactic community. Earth, as it turned out, had opinions about the established order. The crisis began, as most diplomatic disasters do, with a misunderstanding. The HFY's intelligence division, a collection of beings whose collective wisdom was rivaled only by their collective arrogance, had detected what they confidently identified as a planet-killing superweapon in human space. The weapon's energy signature was unlike anything in their databases, which should have been their first clue that perhaps their databases weren't as comprehensive as they believed. Instead, they chose to interpret this gap in their knowledge as evidence of human duplicity rather than HFY ignorance. Ambassador Yelton Grex of the Zentaurian Collective had volunteered to lead the intimidation delegation, a decision he would later classify among his life's greatest mistakes, somewhere between his brief career as a spore farmer and his marriage to his second cousin. Grex possessed the unfortunate combination of boundless confidence and limited imagination that made him ideally suited for HFY diplomacy, which relied heavily on the assumption that all civilizations would naturally bow to superior force when presented with it. The HFY fleet that materialized at the edge of Earth's solar system was designed to impress 17 dreadnoughts, each the size of a small moon, arranged in a formation that had taken the HFY's military strategists 6 months to perfect for maximum psychological impact. Their hulls gleamed with the sort of pristine perfection that screamed, "We've never actually been in a real fight," while their weapon arrays bristled with enough firepower to reduce a continent to constituent atoms. It was, by any reasonable measure, overkill for a diplomatic mission. Then again, the HFY had never been accused of subtlety. The human response arrived exactly 47 minutes after the fleet's arrival, transmitted on a frequency so antiquated that 3 different communications officers had to dust off museum equipment to decode it. The message was brief, professionally courteous, and absolutely infuriating in its complete lack of appropriate terror. "Greetings, hegemony vessels. We acknowledge your request for immediate surrender of our defensive capabilities. We respectfully decline. However, in the interest of preventing unnecessary bloodshed, we propose a demonstration of our actual last resort protocol. Please designate a suitable uninhabited system for the display. We recommend somewhere you don't mind losing." Ambassador Grex read the message 3 times, his secondary brain working overtime to process the casual tone that suggested humans might actually believe they had options in this situation. The phrase "somewhere you don't mind losing" was particularly galling, implying that the humans thought their little demonstration might somehow damage HFY property. It was almost cute, really, like a small child threatening to hold their breath until they got their way. "They want to show off their planet killer," Grex announced to his staff, his voice carrying the weary patience of someone explaining basic physics to a particularly dense student. "Very well, we'll humor them. Choose a dead system in the outer void. Let them waste their ammunition on empty space, and then we'll collect their surrender." The HFY's xenopsychology experts, beings who had earned advanced degrees in theoretical condescension, assured Grex that this was typical behavior for species facing inevitable defeat. Humans, they explained with the confidence of people who had never actually met one, were simply engaging in a face-saving gesture before capitulation. The demonstration would likely involve some crude nuclear device or perhaps a kinetic bombardment system, impressive by primitive standards but laughably obsolete by HFY. What the experts failed to consider, in their rush to categorize human behavior into neat academic boxes, was that humans had a rather unique relationship with the concept of last resort. Where most civilizations viewed their ultimate weapons as tools of final desperation, humans had developed something that made their actual weapons seem quaint by comparison. The designated system was perfect for the HFY's purposes: 3 gas giants orbiting a dying red dwarf, with a handful of asteroid belts providing convenient target practice. It was far enough from inhabited space to prevent collateral damage, isolated enough to keep the demonstration private, and worthless enough that whatever the humans did wouldn't matter in the slightest. At least, that was the theory. The human response to the system designation was immediate and cheerful. Perfect choice. We'll need approximately 72 hours for equipment deployment. Please maintain a safe distance of no less than 5 astronomical units. We wouldn't want any accidents. 5 astronomical units. Ambassador Grex actually laughed when he read that part. Humans were apparently concerned about their little firecracker damaging ships that had weathered supernovas. It was charming really, in the way that watching children play with toy soldiers was charming. The HE fleet settled into a comfortable observation position, their sensors trained on the empty system, their crews preparing for what they assumed would be a brief and educational display of human futility. Betting pools opened across the fleet, with odds favoring a nuclear demonstration at 3-1, followed by kinetic bombardment at 7-2. A few optimistic souls put money on exotic matter weapons, though most considered this wishful thinking. None of them bet on terraforming equipment. The human vessels that arrived was disappointing. Where the HE expected massive battleships bristling with obvious weaponry, they found a modest flotilla of industrial ships that looked more like construction equipment than instruments of war. The largest vessel barely qualified as a frigate by HE standards, and its hull bore the sort of wear patterns associated with honest work rather than military posturing. "Are they planning to build their weapon on site?" asked Commander Vex of the 3rd Battle Group, his confusion evident even through his species' naturally expressionless features. Ambassador Grex studied the sensor readings with growing bewilderment. The human ships were deploying what appeared to be standard terraforming equipment: atmospheric processors, soil analysis drones, water purification systems, and a variety of biological containment units. It looked less like a weapons demonstration and more like the preliminary stages of planetary colonization. "Perhaps their weapon requires specific atmospheric conditions to function," suggested the fleet's science officer, though her tone suggested she didn't believe her own words. The human transmission that followed was delivered with the sort of casual professionalism that made Grex's mandibles clench involuntarily. HE vessels were beginning deployment of the glassing protocol. Initial phase will commence in 6. We recommend recording everything for your archives. You're about to witness something that will reshape your understanding of human capabilities. Grex found himself studying the tactical displays with an uncomfortable feeling that he was missing something crucial. The humans were treating this like a routine operation, their communications filled with technical jargon about soil composition and atmospheric density, rather than the dramatic posturing he expected from a species about to reveal their ultimate weapon. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps human psychology was simply alien enough that they approached even their greatest demonstrations with the same mundane efficiency they brought to everything else. After all, these were the people who had fought 2 world wars with chemical weapons and somehow emerged more concerned about their greenhouse gas emissions than their body count. The demonstration was scheduled to begin at 0. Ambassador Grex settled into his command chair, surrounded by the cream of HE military intelligence, all of them confident they were about to witness something that would confirm their long-held beliefs about human limitations. They were right about witnessing something unprecedented. They were catastrophically wrong about everything else. As the human ships moved into position around the barren 3rd planet, their formations precise and purposeful, Grex couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching the opening moves of a game whose rules no one had bothered to explain to him. The humans were broadcasting constant technical updates, their voices maintaining that same irritating calm that suggested they were performing a routine procedure rather than demonstrating their capacity for mass destruction. Phase 1 deployment commencing, came the latest transmission from the human fleet commander: atmospheric processing online, soil preparation beginning. All personnel please maintain minimum safe distance from target zone. Target zone. As if they were planning to build something rather than destroy it, Grex leaned forward in his chair, his compound eyes fixed on the displays showing the human fleet's activities. Whatever the humans called the glassing protocol, it was about to begin. And despite every rational calculation suggesting that Earth's primitive technology posed no real threat to the galaxy's dominant power, he couldn't shake the growing suspicion that the HE was about to learn something very uncomfortable about their place in the universe. None of them had considered the possibility that they were about to witness the most terrifying capability in the known galaxy: the human ability to make anywhere feel like home. The barren world designated HC-47-1b had all the charm of a diplomatic reception, which is to say it was lifeless, boring, and about to become significantly more complicated than anyone anticipated. It hung in space like a particularly uninspiring paperweight, its surface a delightful combination of toxic atmosphere,
acid rain and the sort of volcanic activity that made real estate developers weep with frustration. It was, in other words, perfectly useless, which made it ideal for demonstrating superweapons, or so the HC delegation believed as they settled into their observation positions with the smug satisfaction of professors preparing to grade a particularly disappointing student presentation. The human fleet that arrived to conduct their demonstration was, well, calling it a fleet was generous. 3 cargo haulers, 2 atmospheric processors, and what appeared to be a mobile research station, comprised the entirety of Earth's supposedly fearsome military response. The vessels bore the sort of utilitarian design that suggested their creators were more concerned with function than intimidation, a philosophy that the HC found both quaint and slightly insulting. Captain Hendricks of the human expedition transmitted his arrival confirmation with the enthusiasm of someone reporting for routine maintenance duty. His voice carried the peculiar blend of competence and casual indifference that humans seem to apply to everything from first contact protocols to breakfast cereal selection. HC Command, this is the human demonstration fleet. We're beginning preliminary surveys of the target world. Estimated timeline for full protocol deployment is 18 hours. 18 hours. Ambassador Grex allowed himself a moment of professional sympathy for whatever poor human engineer had been tasked with making their primitive weapon systems function properly. Clearly, Earth's military technology required extensive setup time, probably involving multiple recalibrations and the sort of percussive maintenance that characterized primitive industrial societies. Yates, the civilian xenobiologist accompanying the human mission, began broadcasting a steady stream of technical data that the HC's linguists dutifully translated and their scientists promptly ignored. The readings covered atmospheric composition, geological surveys, mineral content analysis, and biological contamination levels, all standard terraforming protocols, though none of the aliens bothered to make that connection. After all, why would anyone conduct environmental surveys before obliterating a planet? The human ships moved with the methodical precision of industrial equipment, their formations practical rather than ceremonial. They deployed atmospheric analysis probes, with the same casual efficiency that the HC reserved for checking their morning reports, completely oblivious to the dozens of military sensors tracking their every movement. Are they planning to terraform the planet before destroying? Asked Science Officer Thane, her voice carrying the particular strain of confusion that comes from watching someone perform surgery with a hammer. Some primitive species have ritualistic requirements for their weapons, replied the fleet's xenocultural specialist, with the authority of someone who had read exactly one paper on human psychology. Perhaps they need to purify the target before annihilation. Barbaric, but not unprecedented. What was unprecedented was the sheer scale of the equipment the humans were deploying. Atmospheric processes capable of converting an entire planet's air supply, soil modification systems that could restructure continental geology, biological containment units, the size of city blocks, their purposes mysterious but clearly significant. The HC observers dutifully recorded everything, making detailed notes about human inefficiency while completely missing the terrifying implications of what they were witnessing. The first phase of deployment took 6 hours and involved enough heavy machinery to build a small civilization, which, as it happened, was exactly what the humans were preparing to do. Atmospheric composition analysis complete, reported Yates, with the satisfaction of someone checking items off a grocery list. Current atmosphere is 87% methane, 12% hydrogen sulfide, with trace amounts of noble gases. Gravity is 0.9 Earth standard. Volcanic activity is within acceptable parameters for Phase 2 deployment. Phase 2, the HC delegation leaned forward in their observation chairs, finally expecting to see something resembling a weapon. Instead, they watched the humans deploy what appeared to be the galaxy's most over-engineered gardening equipment. Massive atmospheric converters descended toward the planet's surface, their hulls gleaming with the sort of purposeful design that suggested their creators had spent considerable time thinking about efficiency rather than aesthetic. Behind them came soil processors, water purification systems, and a bewildering array of biological laboratories that began working with the methodical determination of organisms preparing for a very long stay. Fascinating approach, murmured Commander Vex, studying the tactical displays with professional interest. They're apparently planning to make the planet habitable before destroying it. Perhaps their weapon requires specific atmospheric conditions. It was a reasonable theory, assuming one was committed to the belief that humans were demonstrating a weapon at all. The HC delegation had invested so heavily in this assumption that the alternative that they were witnessing something infinitely more threatening simply didn't register as a possibility. The human transmissions continued with their characteristic blend of technical precision and casual commentary, soil modification proceeding ahead of schedule, volcanic stabilization systems online, weather control satellites deploying to standard orbital position, Phase 3 equipment standing by for deployment upon atmospheric completion, weather control satellites. The HC observers noted this detail with the sort of academic interest typically reserved for studying particularly exotic forms of primitive art. Clearly the humans wanted perfect atmospheric conditions for their demonstration, though why anyone would need to control an entire planet's weather to fire a single weapon remained mysterious. What wasn't mysterious was the growing sense among the HC fleet that they were watching something they didn't entirely understand. The human operation proceeded with the sort of smooth coordination that spoke of extensive practice, as if the crews had performed this exact sequence of actions hundreds of times before. Their equipment worked with the reliability of mature technology, their procedures flowed with the efficiency of established doctrine, and their communications carried the casual confidence of people who knew exactly what they were doing. It was the sort of professional competence that made observers uncomfortable, particularly when they couldn't quite grasp what profession was being practiced. Estimated completion time for full protocol implementation is 14 hours, Captain Hendricks reported, his tone suggesting he was discussing routine maintenance rather than preparing for the galaxy's most important weapons demonstration. All systems nominal. HC observers are welcome to monitor our progress. We think you'll find the results educational. Ambassador Grex found himself disliking that word intensely, though he couldn't quite articulate why. Perhaps it was the way the human captain had paused before saying it, as if he was savoring some private joke, or perhaps it was the growing realization that the humans were treating this entire situation with the sort of casual professionalism that suggested they dealt with galactic superpowers on a regular basis, which, considering Earth's recent history, they probably did. The HCAC fleet settled into their observation positions, their sensors trained on the unremarkable planet below, their crews preparing to witness what they assumed would be a brief and decisive demonstration of human limitation. The betting pools had evolved to include exotic matter weapons and temporal manipulation devices, though the smart money remained on some variety of enhanced nuclear device. None of them had considered the possibility that they were about to witness the most terrifying capability in the known galaxy, the human ability to make anywhere feel like home.
The first sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong with the HX's understanding of the situation came at hour 14 when the planet's atmosphere began changing color. What had been a sickly yellow-green miasma of methane and hydrogen sulfide gradually shifted to a pale blue that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling to observers who had expected to see something explode by now. Atmospheric conversion proceeding nominally. Dr. Yates reported with the satisfaction of someone whose science experiment was working exactly as planned. Oxygen levels now at 12% and rising. Methane processing at 94% efficiency. Weather systems stabilizing into predictable patterns. The HX atmospheric specialists stared at their readings in the sort of stunned silence typically reserved for watching someone perform minor miracles with household items. Converting a planetary atmosphere was theoretically possible. Their own terraforming technology could accomplish similar results given enough time and resources. The problem was that enough time usually meant several centuries, and enough resources generally required the industrial output of multiple star systems. The humans were doing it in less than a day. This is impressive terraforming technology, admitted Science Officer Thane, her professional curiosity overriding her species' natural xenophobia. But I fail to see how environmental modification constitutes a weapons demonstration. Ambassador Grex was beginning to share her confusion, though he was reluctant to admit it. The humans had promised a demonstration of their last resort, their ultimate defensive capability, and instead they appeared to be conducting the galaxy's most efficient landscaping project. It was almost insulting, really, as if Earth's government thought the HAC could be distracted by pretty atmospheric effects while they prepared their real weapon. Phase 2 commenced with the deployment of biological systems that transformed confusion into genuine unease among the HAC observers. The humans began seeding the newly breathable atmosphere with organisms that their databases didn't recognize. Plants, bacteria, and microorganisms that seemed designed for rapid propagation and environmental adaptation. Within hours, green patches began appearing on the planet's surface, spreading with the aggressive enthusiasm of weeds in a neglected garden. Biological introduction proceeding on schedule, Captain Hendricks announced cheerfully. Grass coverage at 30% and expanding. Tree saplings establishing root systems ahead of projections. Soil bacteria integration at optimal levels. Grass. They were growing grass. The HX military observers watched in bewildered fascination as the humans systematically converted a dead world into something that resembled a park, complete with what appeared to be recreational walking paths and small lakes where none had existed before. It was undeniably impressive from a technical standpoint, but as a demonstration of military might, it ranked somewhere between interpretive dance and aggressive flower arranging. The breakthrough in HX understanding came during Phase 3, when the humans began deploying infrastructure. Not military installations or weapon platforms, but the sort of civilian construction that suggested people were planning to live there. Permanent, prefabricated housing units descended from the cargo ships with the precision of an airborne construction crew, arranging themselves into neighborhoods with the sort of planned community layout that spoke of extensive urban planning experience. Power distribution networks spread across the continents like silver webs, connecting to geothermal taps and fusion generators, with the casual efficiency of people who had done this many times before. Housing for approximately 50,000 colonists now operational, Yates reported, her voice carrying the mundane satisfaction of someone announcing lunch was ready. Agricultural sectors prepared for immediate cultivation. Industrial zones equipped for standard manufacturing protocols. The planet is now rated Class M3 for human habitation. That was when the first HX officer finally understood what they were witnessing. "They're not demonstrating a weapon," whispered Commander Vex, his voice carrying the particular horror of someone who had just realized they were standing in quicksand. "They're demonstrating colonization." The implications hit the HX delegation like a cascade of falling dominoes, each realization more horrifying than the last. The humans weren't threatening to destroy the planet. They were proving they could make it livable for humans, in 18 hours, from scratch, on a world that had been completely uninhabitable when they started. Ambassador Grex felt his respiratory systems lock up as the full scope of human capability became clear. These weren't primitive warriors demonstrating their capacity for destruction. These were the galaxy's most efficient real estate developers, and they had just proven they could transform any planet into a second Earth, with the sort of casual competence that other species reserved for brewing coffee. "Request clarification," Grex transmitted, his voice steady despite the growing panic in his chest. "This appears to be a terraforming demonstration rather than a weapons test." The human response came with the sort of patient tone typically used to explain obvious things to particularly slow children. "Correct, Ambassador. The glassing protocol is our standard rapid colonization system. We call it glassing because we can make any world transparent to human settlement. Remove the barriers, you might say. Remove the barriers." The phrase echoed through the HX command channels with the weight of a funeral bell. Every species in the galaxy had barriers, atmospheric requirements, gravitational preferences, temperature ranges that defined the narrow zones where their people could survive. These limitations were fundamental constraints that shaped everything from military strategy to trade negotiation. They were the natural boundaries that kept the galaxy's diverse species in their respective territories. Humans apparently didn't believe in boundary. "The demonstration planet is now fully habitable and ready for immediate occupation," Captain Hendricks continued with the sort of professional pride that made Grex's skin crawl. "Standard deployment time for established protocols is 18 to 24 hours depending on initial planetary conditions. Hostile environments may require additional time for geological stabilization." Hostile environment, as if there was any environment that humans couldn't eventually make their own. The HX fleet's sensors confirmed what their crews were too horrified to acknowledge. The planet below had been transformed from a toxic wasteland into something that could support human civilization. Not just support it, welcome it with open arms and a complimentary fruit basket. The atmospheric readings showed oxygen levels perfect for human physiology. The surface temperatures had been regulated to comfortable ranges, and the newly established ecosystems were already showing signs of sustainable development. "How many worlds have you?" asked Science Officer Thane, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, this is fairly routine," Dr. Yates replied with the casual dismissiveness of someone discussing their morning commute.
We've got about 300 colonies operating under similar protocol. Most take a bit longer than this one. Rocky worlds are easier to work with than gas giants, obviously. Though we have made some impressive progress with atmospheric mining operations on the larger planets. 300 worlds that had been converted from whatever they were into human territory. The number hung in the void between the fleets like a toxic cloud, poisoning every assumption the HFY had made about human expansion capabilities and territorial ambition. This concludes our demonstration of the glassing protocol, Captain Hendricks announced with the finality of someone completing a routine inspection. As you can see, Earth's last resort doesn't involve destroying planets. We prefer to make them ours instead. The HFY fleet hung in space, their crews staring at displays that showed a world transformed, their understanding of galactic power dynamics crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. Below them on the planet they had chosen as a safe target for a weapons test, automated systems were already laying the groundwork for the next phase of human expansion. And somewhere in the back of Ambassador Grexy's mind, a small voice was beginning to whisper the question that would reshape the galaxy's political landscape. If humans could do this to one world in 18 hours, what could they do to an entire star system in a month? The emergency session of the Hegemony Council convened exactly 6 hours after the demonstration ended, which was approximately 5 hours and 59 minutes too late to prevent galaxy-wide panic. News of the glassing protocol had spread through diplomatic channels with the efficiency of a particularly virulent plague, carrying with it the sort of existential dread typically reserved for reports of imminent supernovas or accidentally ordering the wrong appetizer at a formal dinner. The council chamber, normally filled with the dignified murmur of civilized debate, now resembled a psychiatric ward during visiting hours. Representatives from 47 species talked, shouted, and in 3 cases hyperventilated simultaneously, their collective voices creating a cacophony that would have impressed even the most dedicated experimental musicians. 18 hours, shrieked the Vorthan delegate, his feathers standing at angles that defied several laws of physics. They converted an entire world in 18 hours. Do you understand what this means for our territorial integrity? The Xantorian representative, who had the misfortune of being directly related to Ambassador Grex and therefore personally responsible for discovering this particular nightmare, attempted to restore order with the sort of desperate authority displayed by substitute teachers facing a classroom of sugar-addled children. If we could maintain some semblance of diplomatic decorum, interrupted the Belaxian counselor, her chitinous exoskeleton clicking with agitation. Humans can colonize our homeworld faster than we can file the paperwork to protest it. This observation prompted a wave of calculations that swept through the chamber as various species began running the numbers on their own territorial vulnerabilities. The mathematics were universally depressing. The crystalline consortium determined that their 17 colony worlds could all be glassed in roughly 2 weeks. The unified aquatic republics realized their water-based civilization was particularly vulnerable to atmospheric modification. The silicon-based confederation discovered that even their high-radiation worlds weren't safe from species that had already colonized 300 planets. The humans, displaying the sort of diplomatic timing that suggested they had been monitoring the HFY's communications, chose that moment to transmit their revised territorial expansion plan. The document was presented with the same casual professionalism they brought to terraforming demonstrations, complete with helpful charts, projected timelines, and a surprisingly considerate section on minimizing disruption to native species. According to preliminary surveys, the human diplomat explained with the patience of someone reading a weather report, we've identified approximately 50,000 worlds suitable for glassing within our immediate expansion radius. Standard protocols suggest a completion timeline of 12 to 15 years, assuming minimal resistance and optimal resource allocation. 50,000 worlds. The number hung in the council chamber like a funeral shroud, suffocating the last vestiges of HFY confidence in their galactic dominance. Several representatives began hyperventilating in languages that their translators couldn't process, while others sat in the sort of stunned silence typically associated with receiving catastrophically bad news from medical professionals. The glassing accords were drafted in record time, which proved that nothing motivated interstellar diplomacy quite like existential terror. The treaty was a masterpiece of desperate compromise, offering humans virtually everything they wanted in exchange for a solemn promise not to glass more than 1,200 worlds per century. It was, by any reasonable measure, a complete capitulation dressed up in the formal language of mutual cooperation. The tribute arrangements were particularly creative. The Vorthan Collective offered exclusive mining rights to their asteroid belts. The aquatic republics provided unlimited access to their deep space hydroponic technologies. The Silicon Confederation surrendered their advanced geological survey data for the next 50 years. Each species frantically offered whatever they thought might convince humans to expand in someone else's direction. Ambassador Grex, whose career had somehow survived the diplomatic equivalent of piloting a starship into a black hole, found himself tasked with delivering the HFY's official response to human expansion plan. The final treaty granted Earth's government everything they had originally claimed to want, plus several concessions they hadn't bothered to ask for, in exchange for maintaining the pretense that this was a negotiated settlement rather than an unconditional surrender. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. The galaxy's most feared species had achieved their status not through military conquest or technological superiority, but through their uncanny ability to make anywhere feel like a suburban neighborhood. They didn't destroy civilizations, they converted them into favorable real estate markets. The final transmission from the human delegation carried the sort of cheerful courtesy that made everyone involved want to hide under their respective beds. Thank you for your cooperation in these matters. We look forward to a long and mutually beneficial expansion period. Also, we wanted to mention that the demonstration world has been officially designated as Colony Site 3. The first settlers arrive next week. As the HFY fleets retreated to their respective territories, their crews running calculations on minimum safe distances from human space, the galaxy settled into its new reality. Somewhere in an unremarkable solar system, the species that had begun their interstellar journey by strapping themselves to controlled explosions continued their expansion with the methodical determination that had made them the most successful invasive species in galactic history. And on a world that had been barren wasteland just days before, the first human children were already playing in parks that hadn't existed when their grandparents were born.